Welcome everyone to Science You Had Me at Hello. My name is Melissa Rancourt and I am the founder and board president of Greenlight for Girls, as well as an engineer, an entrepreneur, and an educator. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's episode. This broadcast series is designed to help inspire the next generation in science. And how do we do that? By asking awe-inspiring individuals to share their stories. The word that comes to mind when I think of the speakers today is dynamic. And when I think of that word, I think of movement, growth, change, interaction, activity, energy, and a force of nature. And that's exactly how I would describe everyone today. This broadcast is brought to you by Greenlight for Girls. We're an international organization that works around the world to create hands-on STEM learning for everyone, with particular focus to girls of all ages and backgrounds. So today, in our studio audience, we welcome all of you from around the world, with a special shout out to our team. Alex, Indra, and Marie, Thaisa, I hear that you have beautiful weather in Brazil, Yelena from the US, and Ayesha, one of our ambassadors, who I'll introduce a bit later. And today is all about you. And those joining us actually also in our audience are coming from so many different countries, so I have to mention them. So Belgium, UK, Singapore, Australia, USA, Germany, UAE, Netherlands, Brazil, there might be more. It's also about our role models and those also to all of you who are listening in after the show. We are inviting onto the stage today 4 amazing speakers. And in a moment, they will share the spark that inspired them in their STEM and professional journey, and we'll learn more about who they are and what they do. So take note of who they are and get ready to ask your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce and bring onto the stage our first speaker, Ruchi Sharma. So Ruchi is our biology expert, CEO extraordinaire, curious inventor. She started her career as a veterinarian, and after a PhD in the exciting field of stem cell research, she now leads a company that develops safe new medicines and treatments while reducing animal testing. Ruchi, it's so lovely to have you here. Now I'm going to bring onto the stage our next speaker, Katrien Goossens. She's a diversity expert, inclusion champion, and change leader. Katrien, it's lovely to see you. We work often with you for Greenlight for Girls, so love having you here. And Katrien has worked for many years, bringing her passion for change to various fields and promoting cultural dexterity in the workplace. She's one of our dynamic heroes, and I can't wait to learn more about the work that you're doing. Thank you, Katrien. All right, next I'm going to bring onto the stage from the US. If we could have Jenn Urmston come to the stage. Jenn is an adventurous and curious graduate student studying marine biology at Hawaii Pacific University. I've got to learn more about this. She's worked on several projects related to seabird conservation in Hawaii, and she plans to work for the US Fish and Wildlife Service after graduating this year. So Jenn, thank you for joining us. And lastly, if I could ask Frances to come onto the stage. Frances Kearns she's studied biomedical engineering, and she now has more than 10 years of experience and currently serves as the corporate quality management systems manager at Philips. So we also want to learn all about your background too. Thank you all for being here. So in a moment, I'm going to ask each of you about perhaps that one moment of inspiration of how you got to be where you are today. But first, I want to mention the name of this broadcast, Science You Had Me at Hello. You know, this phrase, you might recognize we've been inspired by perhaps a movie quote here, but the idea behind it is to share the moments that motivate us to do something, to be part of something bigger, to create, to come up with solutions for people or situations that need us. And the word science, when we use that at any time in Greenlight for Girls, we mean simply everything. So from the subject itself to also the connection to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but also to the idea of curiosity, discovery, and of possibilities. So now, with all that in mind, let's hear from all of you and ask them. So if you think back to your, what was that moment of, this sounds interesting or this has inspired me. And when we think about back to those moments, for some of us, that moment could be way back. It could be, when we're little growing up, or it could be simply yesterday, because we look for that inspiration at any point in our life, right? So with that, I'm going to turn this over. And Ruchi, please tell us about that one moment that inspired you to do what you do today.
Yeah, I was very curious from my childhood. I always wanted to know how things work. I would open up a lot of things, my toys, my music boxes, many things worked, and a lot of them never worked again. But my interest in biology stems back to, again, my childhood because I lost my father at a very young age. So he died of a heart attack. And I just wanted to know why would that be and why nobody could treat it. So as I was growing up, biology was a very interesting subject for me.
Mm.
And later on, I joined a veterinary school, and that led to more specialization in the field of stem cell research. But it's always about knowing how our body functions and how we could actually treat and why there cannot be medicines and there should be ways to treat when the disease strikes. So basically, that was the purpose, and it always guided the choices I've made towards my career.
I love that, especially, that connects to so many stories that I've heard before too, which is especially the personal aspect of something that happened in our lives that connects to wanting to find out why. And when we think about also the science of how our body works, I can imagine that just when you think you understand one thing, it opens up a whole nother level of questions to figure out. And from what I know too, you are very much diving into something that we're all dealing with right now, and that is dealing with the pandemic. So if you wanted to say a few words about what you're doing at this moment, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, so for COVID, so we are developing the testing method because that will help us know who has the infection and that can prevent the others from getting infected. So we can control pandemic better till we are waiting for the vaccines and treatments to be validated. So that's the best we have at this time. But on testing, it's always difficult because it's very small samples we get from like nose or saliva. So we are developing methods so that this could be done with accuracy.
I love hearing that. And I love reading your news too, because whenever I see it, I'm thinking, yes, this is exactly what we need right now. It gives hope. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Katrien, I want to turn this over to you, and then I'm going to keep going back and forth, but I want to hear about everybody's story to see how you got to today. What was that moment of, this is what I want to do? And I especially think about, two words that you had mentioned that describe you, and that is energetic and purpose-driven, which I can only say I completely relate to. So tell us, what is that moment of inspiration perhaps that you've had in your life?
Well, so as you said in your introduction, Melissa, I'm not a scientist myself. So I only discovered this world of STEM late in life. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'm here is that when I studied languages, I worked in a bookshop, did lots of different things, worked as an editor. And then I started working at some point in a bank. And as I grew older, I thought, hey, this is interesting. If I look at, some of the areas in the bank, if I think of IT, or if I think of the product development areas, etc., there seem to be much less women than men. And also, if I looked at the people running the business, they were almost all men. So I was like, why is that? And that triggered me because my mom has always worked. She's been a director of a school for all her life. So for me, it was a given that, anyone can do anything they want. Mm. And it was only at that point in time, doing a bit more research, that I started to realize, it does help if you have the right background. And a STEM background is one way, but a very good way to make sure you can do anything you want in life. Nobody could ever stop you later on and saying, well, I don't think you have the right technical background, or, well, you need to have a maths view on that and you miss that. So that's what sparked my interest. And linked to that, another element is just thanks to G4g. The first time I did a workshop with you, as part of my company's, ambitions to get more girls excited about STEM topics, we took part in workshops. I was terribly nervous because I thought, well, I don't know anything about science. What am I going to do there? And it was so much fun. I mean, I was 35-year-old making a necklace with my own DNA and getting really excited about what DNA is and how it works, and realizing I never actually really knew. So that was a bit later, but it just made me realize that there's this whole world out there that I want people to know about.
I love hearing that.
That's in a nutshell.
Yeah, but that's also the core, what's behind G4G. So this is wonderful to hear. And it's also, a piece of what you mentioned too is so important. And that is that, while we do hope many people may look at STEM careers in the future, it's more importantly something we're trying to do, which is to build interest and curiosity and the potential of just being confident in anything that comes your way, so that you could just take it on. And I know that happens to many people, anyone. You get to a certain part of your career and you're like, oh, something that you might feel is keeping you from something. And that we'd love to address. So it's exactly what inspired you, which is exactly what inspires us. So thank you, Katrien. I'm going to turn this over to Jenn, and with a special shout out to Andrea, one of our G4G board members, because she's in your neighborhood, I know. But Jenn, please tell us what inspired you, and because I especially want to hear, of course, of your work, but let's start there. So how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, so this might come as a shock, but growing up, I actually really did not like science, or at least I didn't think I did. I was really intimidated by it. I always thought science was just test tubes and beakers and chemicals and atoms and molecules, and that seemed really far out to me. But when I was about 13, I had a really great science teacher who did more real world projects with us, things that were more relatable. I specifically remember one project we did where we made our own perfumes, and I was like, hey, I like perfume, that's cool. But I just remember thinking, wait a minute, this is science? And that really kind of broke down the walls for me. And I realized that science is more broad and it applies to everything. And after that experience, once I wasn't afraid of science anymore, then in high school, I did a science research program where I designed my own experiment on something that I was interested in, which at the time was actually music. So what I learned from all of that was that science isn't just about test tubes and chemicals. Science is really more a tool for answering questions. And once I realized that, I realized how powerful science is. And I realized all of these questions that I had as a little kid, like, why do the leaves change in the fall? Why do rainbows happen? I could use science to answer those questions. And ever since then, I've really just been hooked and I never looked back.
Oh, love it. And especially to where you are now, which we're going to dive into in a moment, and what's also next for you, which is even more exciting. So this idea of being curious is just, so relatable, I think, to everyone, but also something that we want to spark in everyone, just to start asking, why does it work the way it does? And knowing that one thing might interest one person versus another. But regardless of what it is, that is a scientific element of being curious and wanting to figure things out, whatever it is. So thank you. And thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn this over to Francis, and also with a special shout out, because you guys are coming from neighborhoods from our board members. So you're in the same neighborhood as Sarah, who is a G4G board member. And Francis, tell us, what is that one moment that may have inspired you to get to where you are today?
So for me, science has always been a part of my life. Both my parents are scientists, and I had an opportunity growing up to always pop into the lab and see what they were working on, or stop into the office and meet their peers and get to see different faces in science. So that was always an exciting experience. But as a young person, there's a lot of things going on and you don't always know what you're going to be when you grow up. But believe it or not, my aha moment was watching Star Trek. So we are a big Star Trek family, and Geordi LaForge, who's an engineer who has a prosthetic, is one of my favorite characters. And that's where I became interested in biomedical engineering. How can science help people do things that maybe they couldn't do before. And I'm always optimistic, even working in the industry now, to see what my peers and I are working on that is advancing the science of healthcare and making it less invasive. I'm waiting for the tricorder and the hypo spray. So that's where I want to be in the future.
Oh, we have that great connection together because I started with my career in healthcare, and I loved being an engineer, but I loved being an engineer in healthcare even more because of that element of what was possible to make our care better. And I especially think of that right now because we really need more and more of it. We need more people in the field. So it's amazing. So you get a chance also with working at your organization to see new innovations that have the potential of something that could change our environment for the better, which must be so fun and rewarding to have.
It's super exciting.
Oh, great. All right, I'm going to dive into a few more questions before we are diving into our breakout rooms. I'm actually going to come back to Jenn for a second because I want to ask about Hawaii and I want to ask about the work that you did there. Because I know you're on the beginning side of your career with lots of things available to you next. Because I always look at any point where we are looking to the future as this wonderful blank slate that I know can be overwhelming for some, but I think it's just very cool because it means you can write your way, right? But I know that along the way you had this opportunity to dive into a very new adventure for you. So tell us what that was like.
Yeah, so living in Hawaii was a really incredible experience. I just recently moved back to New York, but I was there for about 2.5 years. And it was a really great opportunity. I learned so much about the culture there, and it just opened my eyes to a whole new world. But then also being in the field of marine biology, I was just surrounded by things that continued sparking my curiosity. I could go jump in the ocean at any moment and see something that I hadn't seen before. I could hike out to where these seabirds live that I study and just sit there for hours and observe them. Gosh, yeah, I mean, it was really eye-opening and I can't wait to go back there. But
it must also give you great ideas of what's potential, what's next, because, that's one of the benefits. And we always recommend that for anyone who's in their studies to gain experience, because then you start to see what's interesting to you and what might not be interesting to you and what direction you might want to go in. And I know that, Katrien works in the field of people. So especially encouraging people to come and start at companies and try things out. It's something that we try to do at all times. So I'm going to actually turn that over to Katrien. So Katrien, can you tell us a bit of the work that you're doing and why diversity? Why is this something that has been your focus?
Well, we talked about it earlier about the fact that I'm very purpose driven. So I like to do things that I feel make the world a better place and that contribute to something. And for me, the purpose is really making sure that people, can develop to their full potential, can bring their full potential into the world. And you would think, well, why is that not happening right now? I mean, but once you start working, and especially when you start working in a corporate, in a business, you start seeing that, there are certain habits and processes and, we tend to hire the same people that we've hired before or do the same things that have worked before. And then you see that if you don't fit into the box of what someone imagines to be, for example, an engineer or imagines to be a doctor, it's harder for you to make that step. You have to prove yourself more. And so that's why I'm working in this field of diversity and inclusion. Now, I know the words may seem a bit odd, even for people, that they're used a lot, but it's maybe a bit technical. But what we mean by them is actually diversity it just means we're all unique. We're all special. We all have the way we look. We have a gender. We have a color of skin. We have a cultural background. We have a thinking style, etc. And it is so that's wonderful. We have this huge incredible mix of people all around the world. But then when you go, for example, into companies, into schools, you often see the same types over and over again. So I'm still amazed. I don't know how the situation is in other countries, but in Belgium, for example, if you go into, let's just say Microsoft, or any other, more an IT company, well, you'll find more men than women.
Mm.
And if you go into school, it's going to be hard to find a male teacher these days because they're all women. And none is good or bad, but it shows that we tend to group together, and we need mixes of people to really make sure that for example, students get different experiences, that employees think together with different perspectives, etc. So my mission is really, how can we make sure that that diversity that exists in the world is reflected also in our society, in groups where decisions are made, especially when important decisions are made that have an impact on our future. And inclusion is really the piece around, well, how do we make sure that people feel a part of something, that you feel I'm listened to, I'm heard, I can be me. I can, for example, Melissa, I still remember when I first met you and I discovered that you were not only an engineer and founder of G4G, but you also had your own spa. For me, that was like, wow. And she just says that. So, because in my world, the way I was raised, it was something very separate. Spa was sort of a girly thing, and engineering, well, that's more a serious thing and something for the boys. And you were the first person I met who just broke that boundary and said, well, I am this and that and that and that. So it's about making sure that, whoever you are, whatever talents you have, you feel that you can use them, that you can do whatever you want in life, and that you feel proud to share that, and that other people listen to you and appreciate you for what you bring into the world. So that's a bit my mission of why I'm in this field.
Well, and we need more, of course, in what you're doing. We need more of that, as you said, because we see it every day. And it's actually, of course, what sparked G4G in the very beginning as well, and continues to do so. And I love the idea of, making sure that we are including everyone, or everyone feels included, which is a different thing.
Exactly.
One person described it to me as wanting to feel like they have a seat at the table. And as just kind of an image, which I love that image. And I also think of, when I think of diversity, I think of diversity of experiences as well, which, looking back at all of our experiences makes us who we are. So Jenn, your experience of going to Hawaii, whatever you take on next will then become another thing to keep on adding, just as it has for anyone who has gone from one place to the other. I want to turn this over to Ruchi for a second, because when I think about diversity of experiences, I know that you started as a veterinarian, and I know there are a lot of course, girls that we talk to who that would instantly grab their attention. I know a certain one who's at school right now in my household that would want to know. So how did you go from one to the other? What brought you along your way?
Yeah. So the veterinary profession and that experience was great. So in our veterinary school, we were just 4 girls and rest were all boys. So during those years, you overcome some of the gender bias, but it was fun. We were just few girls. But when I became assistant professor, so in my classes, there were about 50% of girls. So within those 4-5 years, I've seen tremendous increase in women. They're becoming more empowered, I'll say. And how I came into stem cell research, because with the veterinary, I've specialized in physiology, and stem cell research was getting a lot of attention because it helps you understand that how the body systems, they regenerate, how the healing happens. So when we don't have tissues and cells, they provide a way of getting the cells, which is just impossible otherwise. And it just looked so fascinating. And then I got married and I came to UK. I just wanted to try for 1 year stem cell research, how it is. And I joined a medical school for doing a 1-year master's. And I just found the field so fascinating, looking at these cells. And then with that, I also learned about tissue engineering. And that was so great, the experience of working through this transmission electron microscopes and looking at the cells to a level which you otherwise just can't imagine. And then also creating these different ways how you can recreate the tissue outside the body. And I just then stayed on, and I continued with my PhD in stem cell research, and I worked on the most fascinating technology of cellular reprogramming, because for stem cell, obviously you have cells that then you culture over a period of time. But in our technology, we take skin cells, and then from that we create different cell types, and I'll show you in a bit about that. So, these fascinating techniques which are developing, and then that not only cells, but all the engineering aspect of that comes in, computational modeling. So it just opened up the whole world for you. And it was great things I was looking and experiencing, and I wanted the whole world to know about it. So I started a company for that purpose, that I don't want to just leave the science behind in a laboratory. I want to share it with the world. I want girls, I want boys, everybody to get involved and enjoy and have fun, because it's just exciting,
Oh, it is exciting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that people are going to have some questions for you. In fact, I think this is a good moment to go into our breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back to this, and I'm going to come back to more questions for everyone. So in a moment, this is our opportunity for travel at the moment, because we're going to travel through the air, and we're going to actually dive into each of your lives for a moment. You're going to have a small group of people with you to ask questions. So with that, in a moment, so for everyone who's online, when you get a chance to go into a room, then you can turn on your video and get ready to ask some great questions to everyone. So in a second, you're going to see something to come up on your screen that's going to say a breakout room. And as soon as you do, then you can press it and go. And then you're going to be there to talk to each one of the wonderful role models that we have with us today. Ask your questions, and then you're going to come right back again. So onto your screen, you'll see something come up, and go ahead and click and dive in and travel.
So I'm born in Belgium. I've always lived in Belgium. Although I wish I've lived abroad. If there's one thing I still want to do at some point is live abroad. I studied abroad for a while as part of an exchange program. So when after high school, I went into university to study languages. So I studied Dutch and English, linguistics and literature. So nothing to do with STEM. I really wanted to go into the world of culture. I love arts and culture, so that was my thing. And in the context of that, I had the opportunity to go to Oxford for a couple of months in the UK, and to go to Vitoria-Gasteiz in the Basque Country in the north of Spain. Two incredible experiences. So if there's one thing I'd recommend you is go abroad when you can. If you have the opportunity, even if it's for a short period, go for it. Because the older you get, the more difficult it gets to, the more ties you have and the more things you have to arrange. So go for it. After my studies, as I said, I wanted to go into cultural field. So I started working for a non-profit cultural organization, organizing events. Loved it. It was really my field. It was a very small organization. I think there were about 40 people. So I got to do a lot of stuff. Finding speakers, finding singers, to organize cultural events with, drafting, doing copywriting for the invitations and the brochure, working with graphic designers, working with venues, etc. So very hands-on, very diverse, really liked it. But after about a year or a year and a half, I don't remember, I had the opportunity, and in my life, what I've learned is there may be a lot of coincidences, but sometimes, well, I believe that things happen for a reason. And if there is an opportunity, even if you think, really, am I going to be able to do this? Should I do this? Try it. What's the worst that can happen is that you don't like it or it doesn't work out. And then, in my view, you've always won. Because either you love the job and you discover, this is really what I want to do, or you discover it's not, but you will always have learned something, even if it's just knowing what you don't want to do in life. So in my case, one of my friends was working in a children's bookshop, and they were looking for a new manager. Now, I had no managerial experience. I loved and still love books, but I'd never run a shop or done any accounting or whatever. So I didn't particularly think I'd be good at it, and I definitely didn't think they would hire me. But okay, I applied, and for God knows what reason, they thought I was fit for the job. So to my utter surprise, and a bit to my, I was very scared actually at the time when they told me, I became the manager of a bookshop. On the one hand, this was an amazing experience because I got to spend, time with books the whole day. Fantastic. And I got to decorate the shop and get to know my clients, have face-to-face contact, work with libraries who are actually the biggest customers of bookshops. So great. However, I also learned two other things. The first one is something that has helped me through life, and that is managing people. How do you lead a team? Because I was 23 and suddenly I had a team of 2 sales assistants, one of which was already in her 50s, who basically told me, you have no experience, you don't know anything about bookshops, I'm not going to listen to anything you say. Okay. But, you learn as you go along, you learn to talk to people, you learn to meet them where they are, they get to know you. And so that's been an invaluable experience, knowing how to lead a team. And maybe one particular example, know how to have difficult conversations. I've learned through my career that in everything you do, at some point in time, you have to tell people things they don't like or they're difficult. And in the bookshop, I had an example that maybe seems stupid, but it was very important and difficult for me at the time. And it was as follows. We used to have our lunch breaks in a room right under the shop. So there was no window. There was a bit of ventilation, but no window. And actually one of the sales assistants had a very bad body odor. She was very, very sweaty. And so when she had left from lunch, the whole room smelled bad. And I was like, oh my God, how do I bring this up? Is it even my role to bring this up? And so in the end, I plucked up my courage and I did tell her in the most respectful way that I could, not being judgmental or not complaining, but just stating the facts and the impact. And actually, that was one of the best conversations I've had in my whole life because I was so scared for it. And then this lady actually told me afterwards, I'm so grateful somebody told me. This must have been the case already for years, but nobody's ever told me something. And I think maybe they were talking behind my back. I didn't know I was giving off a bad body odor, but the fact that you raised this subject with me in a very respectful manner made the difference. So that was very valuable learning. But the other learning was, well, less good, was that I learned that the book sector was not a very reliable employer. So sometimes you get paid, sometimes you don't. At that time, I was renting a flat and I discovered that, not knowing when your wages are coming in is not a good way to work. So I decided to change, even though I loved the books, but I wanted something a bit more stable with a more stable income. So I moved into a whole different direction. I moved to a bank. Now, that happened a bit, again, by accident. My whole life is accidents in the sense that, so I was so focused on something in the cultural sector, but then, you're going to ask something, Thijs?
So you are talking and I'm seeing myself,
Funny.
Yes, because
that?
I graduated in bioprocess engineering. Right now I'm teaching English and I work with g4g. So what do you have to say about these dynamics when it's good and when it's not? As you said, like sometimes you were okay with this changing and sometimes you thought, okay, now I need something more stable. So what is the difference between it's a good thing, this dynamic life, and sometimes not?
It's a very good question. For me, it has always been around the period in my life I was at. So what I mean by that is at that time, for example, I've talked too much. I knew it. We're going to have more breakout sessions to answer questions. But yeah, I'll finish my answer. For me, it was really about my life situation. When I was hiring or an apartment, when I was buying an apartment later on, I wanted stability and security. When I started out after college, all I wanted was, something fun and learn something new. I recently changed jobs again after 15 years having worked for one company. Again, there were pros and cons to it. Here, my driver was, I want to do what I want to continue my job because I love what I do, diversity and inclusion, but I want to see another environment. And you weigh up what is important for you at that moment in your life.
So I'm going to share some pictures of some of the stuff that I've been working on, or that's in my life. So tell me when you can see my screen. All right. Super. So this is a picture of me with my first milling machine. So we had an alumni day back at school, and I was able to go back and visit my milling machine that I worked on almost 20 years before. It's still there. And it was a really good experience, and it was kind of neat to see that it was still there. And then I just have a fun picture of me at work. And some of the work that I do in my organization is helping my company develop medical devices, and I help provide them guidance on what things they need to comply with to be able to create them safely. And I had a family member that had a procedure last week, and in the procedure room was one of our pieces of equipment. So it was pretty cool to see our equipment, being used for a family member outside of the lab and outside of work. I felt really confident as well that we were using that equipment. And then I have a really interesting picture here. These pieces of equipment are tested to make sure they're not emitting any type of stray RF radiation. And this is an antenna, and it's a room lined with foam. And you would take this device, put it in the room, you would run it, and you would see if the antenna could pick up any stray radio frequency waves. You don't want stray waves because you'd have a whole bunch of different equipment in the room, and you don't want them to interact with each other, giving you bad readings. And I have a fun picture. We had a bring your kids to work day, and this is a picture of my kids in the lab. And it's a similar type of lab like the other one, but this one catches a different type of radio frequency information. So it's kind of fun to see my kids in this room. It's like completely soundproof, so if I shut the door and they screamed in there, I wouldn't be able to hear them. So they could have conversations. I could be outside the door and be real quiet. So do you have any questions for me?
I'm curious about something.
Like, what did you study? Or
So I study biomedical engineering, which is the science of combining engineering techniques to advance the health of other people, to improve their health. So I've got a combination of a biological background and a mechanical engineering background.
That's so cool.
Yeah, very cool.
And where did you study?
I went to WPI, which is Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Cool. I have like, what kind of data do you use? Like, I'm studying text mining, and I was wondering about like data usage and how you apply it.
So that's a great question. In my past life, I ran a department that took complaints in from surgeons, doctors, and nurses on the products that we manufactured. And we would analyze those complaints to find out how many were coming in on a certain type of product. What types of complaints we were getting. Was the product shutting down during use? Was the product giving you wrong information? And then how many complaints we were able to resolve successfully. So we would use all of that data, and then we feed that information into something called a risk management profile, where we will able to calculate what is the performance rate of this device out in the field. How well does it perform? How often do you get this type of failure that it just completely shuts off? And when we start to plan on the next version, like the IntelliView, like version 0.5, how can we use that information to make the next one better so it doesn't shut off, or it's waterproof, or the colors are brighter, or the alarms aren't as annoying, that type of thing.
So are you saying that to keep on, even if you think, oh, you have a great, you know, invention or something going on, so how important is it to keep on exploring and to keep on finding, you know, new ways of how the science can be used?
Absolutely. And to get that information directly from your customer. Don't, as the engineer, assume that you know everything about the device. You need that feedback from people who are using it every day.
I'm also something that sparked my interest when you were talking about actually seeing that product, that machine, you know, help somebody close to you and your family. So I'm just thinking, like, what is the feeling you get, and why is that maybe that moment so important when you actually see all the STEM that you've been working on come to life and actually make, you know, a positive impact for someone in your community or in your family? Or
That's a great question. So I've actually worked at quite a few companies, med dev companies, medical device companies, and it's interesting when I walk into a hospital room and I see like 90% of the items in the room are something that I've worked on. So that does make me feel really encouraged and proud that I'm in the industry and motivated to make sure that every single device I touch, every single report I write, every single Excel spreadsheet, every single piece of data I look at is correct, because I know it goes into making these devices better. And in my opening, I said the objective is to have like the tricorder from Star Trek, where you just like scan someone, it's like beep, 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 and you get the results. It's not invasive. I mean, that's where I want things to be. That's the goal. So I'm always going to be motivated to keep working to that.
And we also heard that you actually have different kinds of degrees, and I would love to just like understand a bit more, like, what is so motivating and inspiring about actually combining different kinds of passions in your life and in your work?
That's a great question. So my undergraduate degree is in biomedical engineering, where I did fun stuff like cutting pieces of metal and making them into little engines. But my graduate degree is actually in quality management, which is the science of producing reliable and consistent product. So in the beginning part of my career, I spent a lot of time out on the shop floor, tinkering with things and making things work. But I wanted to find out how we can make products better, faster, and with a high rate of good product coming out. And in the way things sometimes work in the medical device industry is if you make a device, it's going to be used on a person the next day. Like they're waiting for you to finish the product when it comes off the line, and it gets handed to a sales rep and it goes into a hospital room the next morning. So that quality performance is so critical because people are literally waiting on these devices to improve the quality of their life.
And what does it mean for you to combine these different passions in your career, let's say, like personally? Like,
so I think it gave me a bigger perspective of how my degree, my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree can be used to open up more doors for me. So I'm not just limited in working on the shop floor, but I'm able to, right now, my role is I'm actually driving the long-term vision of the company to make it better and how we can do that. So I think it was a really good move to combine those two things and look towards the future.
great, thank you so much.
Okay, I think we're ready. So I, of course, would love to hear about what happened in your breakout room. We probably don't have time to go into all of the details, but the great news is that we're going to do this again in just a moment. Before we do, though, I want to throw in a question in between. Actually, I'm not even going to throw in the question. I'm actually going to ask for the question. So with that, I want to mention that G4G has this wonderful ambassador program where we have girls of a variety of different ages who really want to be that person in their environment to really help to promote curiosity and science to their peers and to more people. And so with that, then we've asked one of our ambassadors to be here with us today. So I'm going to bring forward Aisha Khan. She's based in Germany, and she describes herself as an enthusiastic chemical engineer who likes to paint and is very curious about drugs in the legal way, which I think she means medicine. And that's actually connected to a few of you as well. So Aisha, tell us your question that you have for everyone. It would be a great place to start.
Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. First of all, okay, let me just throw a general question to both our esteemed speakers. So since we have been talking about things that inspired us to reach where we are, but we all know that in everyone's journey, we always had like one fear or a weakness that we carry along. And they always come a breaking point that we overcome and we feel liberated. So my questions to the speakers is that what was the weakness that they really fought along their journey and how did they overcome it?
Great question, Aisha. I'm going to turn this to everyone. I'm going to just guess, and maybe we'll see from everyone. I'm going to turn it to Frances first. Frances, do you have something that comes to mind with Aisha's question?
Yes, that's a really good question. So for me, my weakness was math, and for an engineer to have a math challenge, it's like a big deal.
Yeah.
So one of the ways I overcame it was seeking out help, a lot of help from other tutors and people that I trusted that would help me out along the way, and participating in activities like tutoring sessions with groups of my peers. That way we could work together. So it wasn't always a teacher helping me, but maybe my fellow students kind of helping me. And that sort of made me see that I wasn't alone struggling with math, and that we were struggling with the same types of things. So I still have a little bit of trouble with math, but I feel more confident and I'm a little bit more patient with myself when I have to go through some complex calculations, which in quality, we're big on statistics. So that's a big deal.
It's true, but I love how you involved others in that journey, because the reality is that sometimes we think we're going through something alone when actually it's something that others are dealing with as well. So that's lovely. I'll turn it to also Ruchi. Ruchi, is there something that comes to mind with Aisha's question?
Yeah. In a journey from school to college, it's very hard to make a decision what career we want to pursue, or will be guided by our parents, will be guided by society, by everybody around us. But sometimes we don't have the clarity ourselves. When earlier, like I wanted to become a pilot, but that was not an option because at that time, girls were not there into flying that much. And I had this kind of anger, that why we should have career choices which are kind of guided and not freedom. But later on, as you grow, you understand that it doesn't stop you from anything. Sometimes the change happens after a very long time, because more recently we are having it's been encouraged, the girls into space stations and the girls into flying, and everything is a big story. By that time it was not that much. So sometimes this confusion is a bit of a problem. So at that time, getting a proper career guidance would have been great, which I think is an option available to students now. So we should look for the help and guidance, because we should not restrict ourselves. So I think sometimes, putting ourselves in this closed box actually creates a lot of confusion in our minds. So the liberating act is to find out information. And this next generation is lucky to have that.
Oh, I love that thought. Yes, I feel the same. I always say there's things that happen around us, whether they are extrinsic or intrinsic, which can be demotivators, or maybe give you more barriers than possibilities, at least in your mind. And both of you, both Francis and Ruchi, bring up a few of them, which is, one is mathematics is a very common subject that we grapple with as individuals and feel that we can't do something because of whatever, and then that can be a limitation when it's just a question of just how we tackle it, right? Or what the limitations are of what someone might say we can or cannot do. And of course, within G4G, we always say anything is possible. So it's one of the things that drive us forward. I'm going to turn this to Jenn. Jenn, is there anything that you've experienced along the way that you had to overcome?
Similar to Francis, I struggled with math a lot. It never was really my strong suit. So my approach was to grab the bull by the horns, and I actually did a minor in statistics. And I said, okay, I know you're going to need this, so we're going to go all in. And I just forced myself to learn it. I was fortunate to have a really, really wonderful professor who helped me along the way. And now I feel very confident in statistics. I actually I TA'd a couple courses in grad school, and I do consulting for professors at the university. So I think just kind of being like, yes, this is going to be a challenge, but I'm up for it, was the approach that I took, and it worked out really well for me.
I love that message, especially when we feel uncomfortable about something and we know that it's a good thing to tackle. Then just dive in, eyes open, and just try it, and to see what happens, which is great. All right, one last thing. I want to talk to Katrien. Anything that you've had to overcome along the way, a challenge or something that you had to address?
Well, first of all, I wish that I had seen Francis and Jenn talk when I was still a kid, because I've been all my life, frustrated by the fact that I wasn't good in maths. It's been, a limiting belief all my life. And then when I hear your stories, I think, I shouldn't have stopped. I mean, I shouldn't have given up. At some point, I was really convinced I couldn't do it, so I didn't do it. Yeah. But the thing that came to my mind was in the field I'm in diversity and inclusion. Diversity is a lot also about, monitoring representation of different groups, for example, in a workforce. And one of the things I'm always worried about is that, I'm not good at maths. I know nothing about statistics, so I'm going to call you next time, Jenn. It's good to know. But this is more and more important in my field, to get good data, to get good data quality, to run analysis, etc. And so I always feel very self-conscious when I need to present data or gather data or analyze it, because I'm always worried, somebody will pick on me and say, well, that's not done right. Do you actually have a maths degree? So that always scares, the hell out of me. So I'm enrolled internally within ING. We have within the human resources department, we have a human resources data guild, and it's a community of people who get together and share good practices on statistics, on coding languages, on the basics of Excel, etc. For some people in the club, in the guild, this is a piece of cake, I'm sure. To me, this is, whoa, an eye-opener. It makes me feel very vulnerable. Whenever we have a meeting and they show something and I can't follow, or I don't know how to do it, I feel really stupid. But I recognize that I know more now and I can do more stuff than I was able to do a few months ago. So that also gives me courage and hope to say, sometimes, you got to try, make yourself vulnerable. It's okay not to know something. There are other things I know. This is not something I'm good at, but I'm trying. I'll never be the best statistician or whatever you call them. I don't need to be, but I want to learn enough to feel a bit more, more confident about it.
And to take good decisions. This is
Exactly.
also what's important about data. And I think exactly what you describe, what everyone describes too, is also something that happens to people who are, when we say set in their career or at least on a path. I've had this conversation with engineers all the time, especially throughout school, similar to what you said, Francis, is we, had a phrase which is let's get through, so there, it doesn't, just because you're in what seems to be a complex field doesn't mean that everything comes easily, or that everything is like you're, the thing that you really understand. You have to, get through and start connecting the dots and realize that it will become easier with each level of understanding. And then it's always the case when you look back and you go, why did that seem so difficult to me before? Because now that was fine. But it's only because of time, right? And what we give ourselves. So thank you all for this. And thank you, Aisha, for such a fabulous question. We're actually going to now dive into another room. So thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And for being one of our G4G ambassadors. With that, we're going to go into our second room because I know there's a few more people who want to talk to each of you. So with that, then the travel that's possible is going to happen automatically. So I'm going to queue up the G4G team to get us to move from point A to point B virtually.
So just a real quick introduction about how I got to where I am. I grew up very interested in nature. I was always outside playing, hiking. I would go up to the Maine, up to the coast there, and play around in the tide pools as a little kid. So I was always interested in nature. I went to college and studied marine biology there, where I had a ton of really amazing opportunities. I spent a lot of time out on boats, wading in the water, looking at different things. I got an opportunity to go down to the Bahamas, where I did research on sharks and shorebirds and mangrove trees. And then I loved it so much that I went to graduate school to do my master's degree in marine science. And there I specifically have been studying seabirds. So the kind of work that I do with seabirds, there's really three settings that I work in. There's the field, the lab, and the office or my computer. So I'll share a couple of photos and just kind of talk about those. Let's see here. Okay. All right, so first I want to talk about the field work that I do. So behind me is the Freeman Seabird Preserve, which is a spot where a bunch of birds called wedge-tailed shearwaters live. And it's kind of funny because you can't really see them. Looking at this, it doesn't look like there's any birds there, but there's hundreds of birds that live here. They nest underground in holes in the rocks and little burrows in the sand. So the kind of work that I do out in the field, primarily we're doing things like seabird censuses, where we go out and count the populations of the birds that nest here. So me and some of my colleagues go out, and I kind of liken it to an Easter egg hunt because we're basically going out and looking under every bush and rock and in every hole trying to find birds on their eggs. And then when they hatch, we go out and look for the chicks. So we do things like measure the weight of the birds, we measure their wing length. Sometimes we band the birds so we can keep track of them if they come back. So that's one aspect of the field work. And then I do want to share a photo of one of my birds. Another thing that I really love about what I do is the opportunity to actually help birds and get a chance to rescue them. So this is me with a wedge-tailed shearwater. Now, one of the things that I do is, there we go. So one of the things that I get to do specifically with my job is help rescue birds that have been stranded. So a lot of these birds end up getting stranded on land when they're young and they have a hard time flying back to sea. So something that I get to do is help bring these birds in and give them a little rehabilitation and a little rest. And then when they're ready to go, we release them back out and they fly back out to the ocean. So working with the birds out in the field is one of my favorite things. Another component of what I do is working in the lab. So this is what the lab looks like. Mostly the work that I do in the lab are seabird necropsies. So when the birds die out in nature, people bring them to our lab and we dissect them and try to figure out what happened, why did they die. We look at things like their body condition. So were they really healthy or were they starving? We also look at what they've been eating. So we look at their stomach contents And unfortunately in Hawaii, there's always a lot of plastic that we find in their stomachs, and that can be really concerning. So we look at things like that. We also take samples of their muscle and their feathers, and we send it in for isotope analysis to really find out what's going on there. So that's the kind of lab work that I do. And then I do a lot of work in my office on the computer too. So I spend a lot of time working with statistics, doing data analysis, and I'm also doing a lot of work with GIS. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with that or not, but it's basically an online software where you can map things and do a lot of spatial analysis. So I'll share this photo here. So let's see. Okay, so this is a map that I made of seabird colonies on Oahu, which is the island where I lived in Hawaii. So each one of these little bubbles is showing a colony where the birds live and the relative size. So these are the really big colonies, these ones are smaller. So the kind of work I do really varies, as you can see. There's a lot of field work, which is really fun, and a lot of computer work, which is really interesting. But yeah, there's really no typical day. It just all kind of depends where I'm at on different projects. Yeah, with that, I just want to see, does anyone have any questions so far?
I actually do have one. This is Nikki.
Great.
So this might be a silly question, but just curious, as you're trying to understand like the population and how many are there at a time, like with birds being so quick and flying back and forth, like how do you capture a realistic number when you can't, like, I don't know if you tag them sometimes, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually what we're counting is the number of chicks or eggs, because when the birds are still young, they stay in their burrows and they don't really leave. The parents will fly out to sea and bring them back their fish. But until the birds grow up, they're staying in the nest. So usually we're counting the chicks or the eggs, and that's where we estimate our populations from. Because the adults, like you said, they may or may not be there in their nest at the time. They actually spend most of their time out flying over the ocean. Mm-hmm. So we really, most of our counts are coming from the young.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Hey, Jen, I have a question as well. Two questions, actually. One is that you mentioned the pollution aspect, and I was wondering if you could speak a bit more. Are you seeing an increase in the plastic consumption within the birds, or what is your experience with that? And then two, I loved your statement that you said earlier in the broadcast that science is a tool for answering questions. So I was also wondering, is there a question that you recently had answered?
Yeah, so we have I just realized we have about 20 seconds left. I think I talked too much, so I'll try really quickly. Yes, we're seeing plastic in about all of the birds we find, so that is a big problem. And then science as a tool. Well, right now I answered a question about light pollution and science, and we have 5 seconds, so I'm going to have to touch base with you after this because I think we're about to get cut off. Oh, actually, wait a minute. We have 50.
Yes, one more minute. That's perfect.
So for my master's research, I was studying the effects of light pollution on seabirds. And the birds, when they leave their nest for the first time, are attracted towards light, and they end up stranding on land. And that's where we get a chance to, rescue them and study them in that way. So one of the things that I was looking at was whether a change in street lights, because they recently changed the street lights to new LED lights, if that had any change on the number of birds that were affected. And what I found is it didn't, which is fine. But yeah, anyways, it's really cool to be able to use the scientific method to answer these questions.
So we are in UK, in Cambridge, so it's not very far, and this is a laboratory. So here we do all the fascinating work. So we do cell culture, and in my team I've got biologists but also engineers, and these are the skin cells. So these, what you see on your screen, these are the skin cells growing, and they're proliferating. So these are the cells that we use for creating the stem cells. So we put in genes, and these have then the capability of forming different kind of cells, and we study them and then we give them a cocktail. So here you can see the cells have become like heart cells, and outside in a laboratory, you can see them beating. So this gives us capability to study drug molecules or diseases which otherwise would not have been possible. And this is also an alternative to animal testing. So these are brain cells. So you can see the neuroids. So in our body, these cells take the information and help us respond to what's happening around us. And these are the liver cells. So in the liver, a lot of detoxification happens. It keeps us safe, and we are able to create these cells outside. And in the process, we are helping the human research, but also veterinary research, understanding even animal diseases. And my message to girls is that never think that there's anything impossible for you. If you put your heart into it, you can do anything. You can be very good at mathematics, you can be great in engineering, and you can be great biologists.
Thank you so much for such motivation. I just wanted to say something to you that I also recently worked with a big pharma company where I worked with the defects in tablets. So in my team, I was the only second woman among all the male engineers. So what I, as a beginner, felt that, I don't know if it's a gender thing or as a beginner thing, people sometimes don't take your opinions very seriously, as you and you. As you also said that you started your company. And so I think when you were a beginner, people also did not sometimes took your opinions seriously, but you really believed in them. You really knew that they were the right decisions, they were the right things to do. So how did you manage to make them believe in you and to make yourself heard while not being, impolite to them and not crossing the limits and proving yourself without asking them to accept you?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it happens even now. So it has never stopped. It has happened ever since.
Yeah.
But you have to stay strong. If you're good at something, you are good at that. And you have to have patience. And when you are expressing your opinions, so it is not that you are against something. You have to help them understand your viewpoint better. So we have to, I think, first make ourselves confident that gender has got anything to do with it. It's competition, because in general we see men competing against each other. So they have a comfort zone, knowing the kind of challenges they'll have. With women, it's different. It's an experience for men as well. And I've worked with a lot of different men, different ages. And even in family, you see there are different men around you. So you have to learn actually how to stay strong in your position. You will have challenges. It will take some time because we have to accept that world's not always fair, but it will change. Things were not great for our parents, but they made situations better for us. We could make better choices on our education, our careers. We could do so much that they had a restriction for. And we are again helping the next generation. So when things are happening to us, we just have to find ways, we should not let it disturb our peace of mind. If they don't understand us, we just have to give them time.
Thank you. I do have a quick question, if you don't mind, because you are also a CEO, and I'm a bit curious about that. What made you decide that you could and should become this leader, you should become more entrepreneurial and not just follow someone in their dreams, but build yours and establish yours? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so the entrepreneurship ideas started coming in Cambridge, And it happened for the same reason, because the world around me was great. I was working with, highly experienced scientific groups, but I also come from a far off place, and I've seen the differences between what is required in the real world and the way science is done in academic arena. And I wanted to bridge that gap. And it's not possible to do it by playing safe. So what I wanted to do, I had to take a decision to give my 100% to it. I had to give myself time to work on it. And I decided that I will go out, communicate my idea to people. They may not accept it right away, but if I demonstrate them that why it adds value, what we are now presently doing, if it is taking us 1 month, if I show them that what I have developed is we are able to do it in 10 days, they will see the value and they will accept the kind of ideas that I have. And to do that, I have to decide on to just go ahead. For 1 year, I worked without salary, just communicating my idea, and everybody quite apprehensively thinking, how is she actually going to do it? But after 1 year, they were right sometimes that people will not accept your idea or you as an entrepreneur right away. But there are other ways, when sometimes things don't happen straight, you have to find some sideways. And it happened. We got grant funding, and since we've been building, so challenges are always there, and even in the future they will be. But again, you have to just stay true to what you believe in. You have to live up to passion. I thoroughly enjoy the work that I do, and I want to give a lot of people this opportunity, so that if you want to innovate, if you want to create something, there should be a place. You should not waste a lot of time into the jargon of things and where it will be when multiple elements they come together, and how I can make it just convenient for people to come up with great out-of-box ideas and just get it out there and help the real thing. Because when somebody's suffering, they need that treatment there and then. They just can't wait for like 10 years, and it doesn't even add value. So we can hypothetically do a lot of great things in the next 10 years, but it'll be great if we can do small things even now.
Yeah. And you just mentioned that you love what you do. Can you tell us in 30 seconds, since we have so few left, what's your favorite thing about your job today? What's the favorite thing that every morning you say, oh, this is really what I love?
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things that that take place in our laboratories. We work with different cells, there are different models. More recently, we are creating sensory neurons. So these cells have not been studied that much before. So creating these new models in itself is an amazing experience. And just looking at these things,
Wonderful to see everyone. Okay, all right. Well, I hope you had a chance to have some good questions. And I know that those watching the recording later on will probably still have questions. And so also I imagine that you are available if anyone wants to then have that another inspiring talk. So we can encourage people to reach out and keep asking their questions to Greenlight for Girls, and we can pass them to you. And thank you everyone for your great comments in the chat. So I am going to leave the end of the broadcast with one question to each of you that you can just contemplate, because we have something to do before that. And that is, I'm going to ask you for your, a few words of wishes or last advice that you would give to girls around the world in STEM. So I'll ask you that in a moment. But first, we have to do something that G4G is known for, and that is we have to have an experiment. We can't get together without doing some sort of experiment. So we're going to pass this over and we're going to go into the atelier. So I'm going to leave it to the team to guide us through. I can't wait to see what we've got up to now.
Today, we are asking our team at Greenlight for Girls, what does it mean for something or someone to be dynamic? And what impact can that have on science? We believe that harnessing creativity for new ideas or new approaches gives us an opportunity to make new connections and progress in ways that we never imagined. And we love the challenge of being able to shift perspectives, turn a problem upside down, and learn in innovative and dynamic ways. Which is why we are especially excited to explore the science behind animation, movement, and sustainable future thinking with you today. So, come experiment with us!
Thank you to our Green Light for Girls team. I love seeing the experiments each time, and this one all about dynamic, and also an apt description to all of our speakers today and what we all aim to be. So with that, I'm going to bring our speakers on for one last thing, because we're ending in just a few short minutes. And just a last question that I have for you, and that is some final words of inspiration. So if you could have a wish for the world or a wish and advice for girls in STEM in the world, what would it be? And some last words would be lovely for us to hear. So I'm going to turn to Ruchi first. Ruchi, what would you say?
See, we are half a world population, yet there is massive divide between men and women in STEM. I hope that more girls take up the opportunity to build a career around these fields. These are amazing ways to know ourselves better and change the whole world around us. And I believe that the next generation of girls can help it all become fascinating and better, because women have more emotional intelligence and they're more creative. We just have to be confident and help world see the wonders that we'll be creating. So just, I want girls to be confident and ambitious.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Jenn, what would be your words of inspiration to others?
So my last words of advice for girls in STEM is to feed your curiosity, ask lots of questions, and don't settle for short answers if you're still curious. Challenge your teachers and professors, and also know that it's okay if they don't have the answers. But if you don't get the answer that you're looking for, go Google it, research it, look it up. And if that answer, you can't find it anywhere, then maybe that's your project. Maybe that's what you figure out. But you don't have to settle for the short answer. Keep digging, challenge people, and really find the answers to your questions at all costs.
Oh, thank you for this. And Frances?
I would say let your voice be heard and make sure you are able to participate. Come to the front of the classroom, pick up the tools, and don't just sit in the back and let other people do the stuff that you want to do.
Nice. Okay. And Katrien?
When somebody tells you you've done something wrong or you get criticism, don't take it personal. I know it's harder said than done. I still take it personal every single time, but it's so important. It's not about you. It doesn't say anything about you. If you've done something wrong, it's just an opportunity to learn, to get even better. And secondly, if you take the effort to try something or do something that seems hard in the beginning, you'll always win. You'll never, ever fail. And the reason for that is either you'll get it done, and then imagine, the sense of achievement and pride you will feel, or yes, guess what? Maybe you can't do it or you will not get it done, but you will have learned so much from it, from what not to do anymore in the future, or how to do it differently, etc. So you always win. You always get something out of it. And in general, my wish for girls in STEM is just keep discovering. I wish that each one of you can discover how you each individually can use your unique skills and talents, and especially also your STEM interests, to make the world a better place. I think when I grew up, I had the stereotype in my head of STEM and engineering and maths. Yeah, that's something boring, serious, and there's actually no link with real life. That was also because of the way I was taught. And now I realize there's a link with everything in life. As Melissa says, it's about curiosity, coming up with creative solutions. It's about seeing connections between things. So I hope you don't lose the time I lost, and that you now already see how your unique talents and skills can help build this world for the better.
Thank you all. It's amazingly inspiring words, and just what we all need to hear, not only when we're in the beginning of our potential journey along the way to what we do around the world, but also what we all need to hear every day. We need to hear this from each other and for ourselves, because we always need to continue to grow and do more and more. And we all have that great potential and the need, of course, in society for us to do this. So with that, I have one final thing, and that is that I'd like to invite our entire G4G team, our ambassadors that are here today, all of our participants, to join us on the stage. Turn on that video, because we're going to do one last goodbye wave. Great. All right. So one final wave from everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and keep doing all the great work that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll see you on the next Science You Had Me at Hello.